Okay, so today we're going to go over probability and genetic crosses. Since I know that y'all just recently went over probability in math class, I'll probably go pretty fast through the math section. So probability, if you roll a die, what's the probability of it landing on the 6? If you pull one card from the deck, what's the probability of you getting the ace of hearts? Well, the probability of rolling a die would be 1 out of 6. There are 6 sides to every die, and only one side has a 6 on there. So the very first part of the fraction is what exists, and the bottom is the total. There are 52 cards in a deck, and only one ace of hearts, so the answer would be 1 out of 52. If you were to flip a coin, what's the probability of it landing on heads? There's only 2 sides to the coin and only one head, so it would be 1/2. So let's go into Gregor Mendel when we talk about a genetic cross. Like I mentioned in the other video, Gregor Mendel is considered the father of genetics. He is the one that discovered the probability could be used to predict the results of a genetic cross, of mating of two different parents. Now, if you know that your parents' genotypes, you can predict the offspring of their genotypes. And kind of like what I told you when I was pregnant with my daughter, I would do Punnett Squares and figure out the probability of her having green eyes versus blue eyes, red hair versus blonde hair. So if you know the parents, you can predict the offspring. So for example, let's go back to our superheroes. Brown hair is going to be dominant, so we're going to represent it with a capital B. And blonde hair is going to be recessive, and we'll use a lowercase b. So what are the possible genotypes of their offspring? Why do not all the children look identical? Well, let's take the mother's genotype, which is big B, little b, so she's obviously heterozygous for it, and cross it with the dad, who is blonde, so he has to be little b, little b. So the possibility is they can have either be heterozygous or homozygous recessives. So what is the probability that the Incredibles' next child will have brown hair? Well, how many possibilities are there? There's 4. 2 of them are brown, so it's 2 out of 4, which reduces to 1/2, which is 50%. In pea plants, Gregor Mendel studied pea plants a lot. He discovered that smooth peas are dominant over wrinkled peas. So a homozygous smooth pea is crossed with a wrinkled pea. So we need to type the genotypes of our parents. So big S because it's homozygous dominant, and little s because if it's wrinkled, it has to be homozygous recessive. Because remember, you can't have a dominant be there and it not show. So when you have a recessive trait, you know you have to be homozygous dominant. So looking at the possible offspring, we have all heterozygous, meaning that for this, if you cross these two, you have a 100% chance that it would be a smooth pea, 4 out of 4. Guinea pigs, dark fur was dominant over light fur, so we're going to cross a heterozygous dark, so predict what you think the genotype for that would be, with a light guinea pig, which means it's homozygous recessive. So the genotypes would be big D, little d, crossed with little d, little d. So the possible outcomes would be 2 heterozygous and 2 homozygous recessive, meaning 50% chance of dark fur and a 50% chance of light fur. And just remember how I showed you to fill the Punnett Square out in class, and we'll go over that more in class. I can't get it to fill in a PowerPoint. So if you know your offspring's genotype, then can you backtrace and figure out what the parent's genotype was? Exactly. You can do it that way. If Dash's genotype is little b, then what is his parent's genotype? Well, if he's homozygous recessive, you know that he had to get both of those from each parent. So you just would take one little b and give it to the mom, and one little b and give it to the dad. Well, if the dad has blonde hair, then logic would let you know that his other allele must be a little b. And if the mother has brown hair, her other allele must be a big B. It's kind of like when my daughter was born, nobody knew, my husband and my mother-in-law had no idea what their blood type was. But when my daughter was born, we realized that she had A blood type. So I was able to tell my husband that his blood type was A and therefore it was his mother's because my blood type is O, meaning I'm a homozygous recessive blood. So all I could give was an O. So the only way that my daughter could get A was that if her father gave it to her. I know that my father-in-law also has O-type blood. So if my husband has A and my father-in-law has O, then that means he must have gotten his A from his mother. So just like you can predict the probability, you can also trace genes back, which is something you're going to do in this PBL. Okay, so what is the genotype of the offspring? If you had 2 dark-furred guinea pigs produce a light fur offspring, is it possible? Well, when you have 2 dark produce a light, that lets you know that obviously the parents must be heterozygous. And we call these carriers, meaning they carry a gene, they just don't exhibit the gene. So heterozygous, heterozygous. So the Punnett Square was created by Reginald Punnett, and he used it for predicting the outcome of the genetic crosses like we did earlier. Okay, so just remember, you're always going to put 1 allele from your parents in each box and then just bring them down and over. So when we do a 4 Punnett Square, obviously our probability is either going to be 1 out of 4, 2 out of 4, 3 out of 4. Or 4 out of 4. So you either can have a 25, 50, 75, or 100% probability. And they show all the possible outcomes of a genetic trait for 1 offspring. So remember that. When you do a Punnett Square, it's not predicting that if you had 4 kids what they would be. It's predicting the possibilities of that 1 child or offspring. So, showing all the possibilities and outcomes of genetic cross, let's do dogs. The dog show is going on right now, so that works perfectly. If you were to cross a dog with short hair that is dominant with a dog with long hair, could you determine the possible offspring's phenotypes? So, let's apply it. So, we have a heterozygous mom with a homozygous dominant dad. So, again, take 1 allele and put it into each slot. And then you just bring them down and over. So the possibility for her offspring is that she would have a 25% chance, a 50% chance of it being homozygous dominant, and a 50% chance of it being heterozygous, but a 100% chance of it having short hair. So why use a Punnett Square? Many scientists study many traits at a time, and even though we're just showing you a 4 Punnett Square, when you do get into high school biology, it can get very confusing without them. This is what we call a 16 Punnett Square, where you are actually tracing 2 particular traits or phenotypes together. So humans use, like I said, Punnett Squares to have, if we have straight toes, is dominant compared to if you have curled toes. So let's determine the possibility of crossing between a recessive male and a heterozygous female. So now can you tell me what the genotype is if I say it's a recessive male? That means it must be little s, little s. And if I tell you the female is heterozygous, it must be big S, little s. So go ahead and fill in the Punnett Square. And notice that you have the possibility of 50% chance with straight toes or 50% chance with curled toes. Again, you could do it with pea plants, yellow being dominant over green. If you had 2 heterozygous parents, that means they are both one big, one little, you would get a 25% chance of homozygous dominant, a 50% chance of heterozygous, and a 25% chance of homozygous recessive, meaning a 75% chance, because these 3 are all yellow, and a 25% chance for green. So now let's go into incomplete dominance. You know what? Actually, I think I'll stop here, and I'll just end this PowerPoint, and we'll have another flip video on incomplete dominance. All right, so if you need to pause the video, go back and see anything you need to see again.